Thanks for showing up, Luis. So this is the main point of this video is, how is hunger, pain, and evolution related? Evolution is it's like a huge topic that people talk about, and there's uh, a lot of ideas around. We're starting to move away from Darwin's theory of evolution. Uh,
Mhm.
if you look in the historical landscape here, the in the timeline of evolution, there's three main things that I want people to take notice here is that for one thing, all of these periods of evolution, of major changes in evolution, happened at the top of growth cycles of a species that were taking over in that era. Every single time it was a big evolution, or it was a big that species of the one that passed away and a new species came in. uh,
Mhm.
they were taking over that landscape. The Permian and Triassic period, where that was a huge extinction event. They said that the ocean levels had risen, and there was so much homogeneous activity throughout the culture that there was an algae that actually almost started taking over that whole and that ecosystem. And so it starved itself out, and it just universally died. 96% of all species died then. And then there was an instant evolution. It was almost instantaneous in the evolutional record. And that's why Darwinism has started to break down in a lot of ways, because um, there was always an instantaneous evolution of species, and all of a sudden there was a new species that came about after the old species died. And it was always in the geological record, it's also a little bit of a mystery as to why that happened. They always think, well, they could have starved out. It could have been a meteor, right? That changed the whole climate, where it all of a sudden, the environment was inhabitable anymore. But there was always a species that a, a higher performing species that move a higher performing structure. There was a more evolved species that moved more energy and information through its body. So it was always an evolution of species. It never regressed, which is very interesting when you look at the geological record. The evolution keeps going forward. It never goes backwards. Even though everything dies, it always goes forward. Another thing to notice is that the all these peaks and cycles of the evolutionary period happen at approximately quarter cycles of the our solar system's uh, travel around the galactic core. So if you look at, and we're going to look at this in a slide here pretty soon, but if you look at the sun's full rotation around its own axis, it happens around every 24,000 years, or a full precession of the equinox. 24,000 to 26,000 years. That's our solar system turning in the opposite direction, facing the galactic core, as it has that our Earth goes through that cycle, during its annual cycle, because the Earth is spinning in the opposite direction that the solar system is spinning around the galactic core. This is a common
Mhm.
thing when you see any kind of astral body that's moving around anything else. It's always spinning in the opposite direction that it's moving around that astral body. Very
Okay.
interesting.
Mhm.
So we see three things here. We see big quarter cycle evolutionaries. We see that when species kind of reach their peak, and there's more of that species than has ever been before, it almost immediately dies and gives birth to a new species. Um, Very interesting. So let's go to the next slide here. So before we go on to looking at cycles, I'd like to kind of concentrate on individual cycles. We are either in our creating or consuming energy, and there are healthy and distorted versions of both. A pure creative cycle is when you're just focusing on something and building something just for yourself, right? When you're consuming, if you're doing it in a natural way that follows this biofield picture here, or the toroidal field in the middle, you're just naturally attracting, as you create from your environment. You could say that, me writing a book and that thing that I created is naturally attracting people to that book, and then I'm naturally consuming that thing that I create. You know, in your biofield, when you look at it, everything above your heart chakra is coming up and out. So, you know, in a way, I'm speaking from my heart space, and I'm also speaking from my understanding or the way I view myself and reality. So, everything has the way that we create always is anchored in our belief systems on what we are, how we relate to our environment, and you know that switching energy that switches between our natural creative and attractive cycles. Um, that's you know in and of itself in a nutshell. Now, over time, you know, your field expands and contracts. So, you know, during the day, I'm in my creative energy right now. At night, when I'm sleeping, I'm in my attractive energy. My field is expanding as my body rests and I'm soaking in information. This is why a lot of spiritual leaders and my personal experience is that a lot of times you come into new revelations when you in your waking state because you'll absorb energy and information during your sleeping hours, and then all of a sudden you come into higher levels of awareness in your waking area. It's like, oh, wow, I didn't know that before. A really good technique that I've had is that if you have a question, ask yourself a question, sleep on it, and the next morning, oftentimes you'll get an answer for that. So this is just a basic interpretation of how your body works naturally. And as we keep going forward, we'll see how everything works pretty much exactly the same way.
Mhm.
Any comments or questions so far, Luis?
I was going to ask you about the aura. Is that electrical? I know we have an aura, but what is it made of? Is it electrical energy? What kind of energy is it?
Right. So, I mean, we can talk about this as far as this slide goes too, because this kind of rolls into this slide.
Oh,
Everything
okay.
is structure and energy, or time,
Mhm.
time
Mhm.
over energy. You know, it takes time to move energy or frequency. And so
Mhm.
frequency creates structure. Anybody can go online, and I didn't put it on this video, but the number of times creates the structure that you see. So your
Mhm.
heart chakra, or this picture behind me, is vibrating at a different frequency that manifests the physical structure that you see here. So we can take from a chemical standpoint, we can take an electromagnetic or a we can measure the frequency of everything, and it will show the stacked frequencies that create that structure chemically. We call it chemistry, but it's physics too. You know, it's your body, this vessel is both moving light and holding light. And the amount of light it holds is usually a resistance to the light it can move. So light being
Mhm.
both frequency and energy. A lot of people talk about, you know, when they talk about energy work, they kind of ignore the frequency factor. But, you know, when we look at light and what light is both frequency and energy. So, the correct way to say it was you're always moving light, consuming light. Everything is light in and of itself. And, you know, this is
Mhm.
basically Einstein's theory of relativity and why that equation was so powerful. You know, he equated the fact that energy and frequency were directly related, and it had to do with a captured amount of light that represented a specific mass in our and but that mass was relative to the way we're measuring that frequency and the energy that's in that mass. So amazing equation. I think there's probably some better interpretations. I think physicists are probably going to find here in the very near future, because in some situations in quantum physics, Einstein's theory of relativity kind of breaks down a little bit because um, for that reason, because a structure is only capturing so much light relative to its mass and that relativity.
Mhm.
Um, so going on here. And this is something that I started to realize when I started to look into all these relationships. If you look at the relationships, like in the bottom right here or the bottom left, the little guy here, he,
Mhm.
our relation to uh, the Earth is approximately 3.5 million times. Those relationships are very interesting when you look at the relationship from the, oops, wrong, from the Earth to the sun to the solar system. Uh, it's approximately 12. It's the ratios are so close to being, it's a uh, almost a million times the size from the Earth to the Kuiper Belt, and the size of the sun to the Kuiper Belt is 8,600 times. That falls back into the number of hours that are related to an annual year. So, which is also the same number of times for a solar day to its number of times of an orbit around the galaxy, if it takes 230 million years to go around the galaxy. Now, we are often told that, and this is a question that I had that prompted all these ratios to finding these ratios, was that how did we come up with the base 12 and the base 60 system? Because from a just a logical standpoint, why don't we divide a day up into 60 parts and then divide that part into 60 parts and then that part into 60? Instead, we divide a day into a base 12 system and then divide those parts into 60. And when you look at all of these ratios, it tells that story, because everything of an orbit around another body is in base 12, and the time that it takes to spin is in base 60, which is also base 12, and then those parts are turned into base 60. And how would the Mesopotamians and the Sumerians know that that is a universal standard on the state of reality? Very interesting that they would already know that back then, right? I mean, it just go ahead.
A quick question. You mentioned the belt, something belt.
Let's say that again.
You mentioned something belt. I missed that piece. What's the term and what does it mean?
Well, belt.
Yeah, it was something around belt or bell.
Yeah, well,
Um,
I was just referring to basically different orbits around centers. So,
oh, okay, okay.
uh, and not only that, but every orbiting body is spinning in the reverse direction. Most of these, all these relationships are telling us that the only thing that is really different, because the relationship is identical between time and space. This is something
Mhm.
that, Einstein realizes, that time and space was relative and it depended on how you're looking at it. For example, um, my cycle of my creative and receptive cycle, and that switching,
Mhm.
is directly related to my size. So you look at the heart rate of an elephant, its
Mhm.
heart rate is directly slower to its size relative to me. Same thing as, the Earth's motion around the sun. It's directly relative to its size for the solar system as the solar system's size is to the galaxy. Direct relation, which falls into why quantum physics works and why every point in time is instantaneously connected to every other time. And the only thing that separates that is when you pull that point apart and create these two poles that switch back and forth. Very interesting. So, that feeding energy is what causes you to feed on your environment, that makes you feel less than whole. That's going to be an overriding issue as the evolution of species, that hunger and that pain of not being whole or not being instantaneously connected to everything else, right? If you felt like you were instantaneously connected to the whole universe all at once, you would never feel like you would need anything, right? I mean, obviously you feel no. And so each evolution of species has created a structure that has moved more energy and information and switched um, to move more energy and information and receive more energy and information. So let's go next slide. So knowing that, each field has a tendency. And when we look at lower tendencies, let's say I'm someone who's carrying a lot of emotional trauma or something like that. My tendency
Mhm.
would be more consuming, because I feel less than, or I feel I have such a I'm carrying such a burden that I need to feed on my environment more. So I have an overwhelming consuming or feminine tendency, which kind of represents itself as a black hole on the left. But when we realize, if we realize that and we're looking at a much larger field, we're only looking at just one very small part of one cycle. That black hole might have looked like a galaxy a trillion years ago, right? You're just looking at such a much longer cycle that our interpretation of time gets so skewed that we think that this thing has always existed this way, or we don't really know the history of it. But when you look at from a wholesome aspect and you can see that the frequency of everything is directly related to its spatial dimension, then you can say, oh, wow, I'm looking at the same thing. I'm looking at a field that's moving energy and information or light through it, and it's switching relative to its size. So you're looking at something that's switching. When you're looking at a black hole, you're looking at something that is switched into its feminine energy, and vice versa. When you look at, let's say, the Milky Way galaxy or the Andromeda galaxy that has a positive tendency where it's producing more light than it's consuming, that's in its creative energy. The same thing when you look at our annual cycle when it comes to when we are facing the sun more, we are receiving more energy from that star that is in its creative energy. It's not consuming more, it's creating more heat than it's consuming. So, but at the same time, when we move into the winter cycle, we're getting more energy pulled from us because there's less heat. And so the average cycle, when you look at the median cycle, that's when everything is in stasis, basically the spring equinox and the fall equinox, when everything is in stasis and there's no, that energy is being balanced. So
That affects moods.
yeah, affects well, when you look at your personal state, let's say, that causes pain when it feels like you're getting something pulled from you, right? Um, Generally speaking, people like to live in the tropics because the
Mhm.
temperatures are median, and you're always soaking up the sun. There's
Mhm.
less, but at the same time, people that live in the Arctic areas are much hardier people. They've
Mhm.
learned to create their own energy in a way. So that theme will present itself that what we're getting ready to go through. The hardiest, strongest species usually survive at least the small cyclic events because they've learned to create their own energy in some way, create their own systems to survive and depend on one another. So. So
Thinking.
how do we view, all of this? When we see this bigger picture and we see that all we're seeing are basically just switching cycles, how are we viewing ourselves? How are we viewing each other? If we see the world in the way that we see ourselves. And so, a judgment of the mind, you say, okay, this thing is different only because it's switching differently, not because it's not us. We're just seeing a tendency, basically a masculine or a feminine tendency, where you're either pulling more or you're producing more. So it's part of nature. There's nothing that you can get around it. And so that judgment of the mind creates a block and a separation, and it creates a double-mindedness where it's like it actually pulls you into that tendency of a feminine tendency to pull off your environment. And so that happens in your creative mind. That's on your creative circuit. So every time you're creating a judgment here, it creates a block to that higher awareness that is a more wholesome awareness. If you, in the next slide, we'll see how, if everything is coming from one source of light, because every time you look at a larger system, you just see one field. If I look at my biofield, I'm seeing one field. But then if I look at the Earth, I'm seeing one field. But then if I look at the solar system, I'm looking at one field where everything is coming from one point and going back to at that point. All it's doing is switching in order to create this illusion of separation. Um, the same thing when you look at a galaxy, you're looking at one field. When you look at your body, you're looking at one field, but there's all these other little fields in there switching so much faster to create the field that is in. But when you look at your cell or an atom, it's switching that many times faster to create that separation to it creates that field around it. And if it's a negative tendency, it's pulling itself apart from each other. And if it's a positive tendency, it's pulling itself towards one another.
I love that. I love that. Well, judgment in the mind creates a block and separation. I'm gonna write it down. Is that yours?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I like that.
so yeah, I mean, and by not creating a judgment in the mind, it opens you up energetically to what you're actually seeing, because it becomes a much easier to stay in non-judgment and non-attachment, to actually observe what you're seeing and how you're feeling about not only yourself, the way you're observing yourself, and the way you're observing other people, because you'll see where they are blocking themselves in their environment by the way they're energetically blocking their relationships, or the way they're judging themselves. So I have this picture in the upper right here in this slide, that kind of shows this. I just Googled Christ consciousness, and I just got this picture of this blooming flower that somebody's sitting on, and this, you can see it's basically just an expanding field where you can see their crown chakras kind of coming into their head, and they're seeing a whole wholesome mindset, and you're at peace. Because if you fall into judgment, it always pulls you out of a state of peace, because it puts you in conflict with your environment. Um, so yeah, if we imagine reality as a snowflake, um, you can see a tree of branching structures of energy. Let's pretend that, let me get my cursor here. I mean, you could pretend that here is source, at the center, and
Cool.
let's say I'm in three-dimensional reality, and as light comes from source, it breaks down in all these denser realities until it gets to, let's say, three-dimensional reality. And I'm interacting with somebody over here in this three-dimensional reality. And so we've got all these branching structures that are interacting and switching in a way. Not only that, but even reality itself and non-physical reality is switching in a way where it's either creative and coming from source, or it's on the bottom side that's pulling in a way. So you have non-physical parts of you that are pulling, and non-physical parts of you that are creating. And everything switches in this fashion. So when you're interacting with somebody, it becomes, especially when you become in higher states of awareness, you can see the way that you are naturally attracting, instead of, let's say, visually looking at somebody and trying to create sales is based on the idea that I am, creating something for you because you have something that I need. It comes from a place of projecting an image of not being whole. Very difficult to realize, in the system that we live in. And part of it, now let me go back to the previous slide, because this is something that I didn't cover. If you look at this upper graph here on the top side here, and we're looking at a 24,000 year cycle. The cycle that we just went through, if you look at it from an energetic standpoint, there was a breakdown around 13,000 years ago, and we can see that in the geological record, where there was an old civilization, and there's more and more understanding that there was an old civilization that fell away. And in the last 13,000 years, we went kind of back into the dark ages, where we went more into an animalistic nature, and we're feeding off of each other more. So we're going through this cycle, and where emotionally you're feeling less than whole, but we're getting really close to breaking through another barrier, because we're at the end of this much larger cycle. So when you think about where we are in the time slot, we're kind of right here. That was 24,000 years before the beginning of this last full cycle of that precession of the equinoxes. So, to say that we are actually going through an evolutionary event in a lot of ways, and I'll be able to show that in future slides, to say that we're in an intermediate state because of the structures that we built around ourselves to create more of an energetic black hole versus an energetic star. because when you're in the negative tendency, you're pulling more towards yourself than you would be than providing for yourself in the positive tendency of the other 13,000 year period that was before this one that we just went through. So working off of that concept, we can see that, and I put the slide here. And if you think about how your body works, your body grows naturally. And this upper left-hand organizational chart, let me move my thing here out of the way so people can see it a little bit better, is kind of just indicative of a natural growing organism, right? Where control comes from the outside, right? We're always controlled from the outside, and your heart is always providing energy and receiving energy on the inside, and it has to be purely providing and then purely receiving naturally. If it's creating any kind of control, if your heart tried to control your body in any way, you just keel over and die, right? I mean, your heart can't control anything. All it's doing is providing what the body needs as it needs it. If I start clapping my hands, or if my brain becomes more active, my heart gets beating at a higher rate. Your heart also stays at rest more as long as if you're moving energy naturally. If you come into a really high state of distress, if the body gets into stress, or if you have conflicts within the body, then the heart rate elevates and the body starts to break down. That model, if you're just purely providing for your environment, that's based on humility and acceptance. Because in order to provide for your environment outside of judgment, you have to accept it the way it is and provide for it and be humble to what it needs. On the flip side, the control systems that we have created in our society, where most of the energy is collecting towards the middle, is indicative of a black hole or a feminine tendency. Totally natural, to say that is part of the cycle that we are just going through, over the last 13,000 years. And that's what we've witnessed. We've witnessed governmental structures that create a system that siphons energy towards the center, and then they use that energy to disperse it out. But instead of providing energy from the inside and then naturally attracting what it needs, two totally different mindsets. That system is based on pride and judgment versus humility and acceptance. It's very easy to see it from the outside when you think of it that way, that it's just a natural tendency in the cycle that we're in, and we're seeing evidence that we're moving out of that cycle on a macro scale. And we can look at that in the next slide. So where are we at now? This is indicative so much of what we're going through. These unhealthy business and social structures built on pride are leading to breakdowns and more coaches, consultants, and independent contractors. More and more people are offering services because people are having a hard time working together. It has to do with self-worth, right? How does it make sense that somebody working as an employee for a company is worth less than somebody working somewhere else in the company? The center of the company is more of facilitators, just moving information and energy, whereas the product side, you're actually creating something for the consumer. And but because those structures are built on feminine tendencies, the product that they're creating is creating a feminine tendency in the environment as well. When you think about what kind of products we're creating, phones that trigger the dopamine response, that try to get you to consume your time into that phone. So many products out there are trying to consume your energy instead of providing you and lifting you up, has led to the thousands of psychic readers on YouTube, people that have pulled themselves out of the system and have chosen, not to directly sell and got into higher states of awareness. Now, there's a very large spectrum of psychic readers on YouTube, because there's people in different states of healing. For example, if people are worried about their external environment too much, and they're worried about, their interpersonal relationships and how somebody might be attacking them. And so there's readers out there that are feeding into victimized consciousness, where I'm a victim of my environment and it's feeding off me and I can't create, anything for myself. There's also, and that moves into higher states of awareness where you'll see readers that are connecting with a very small audience of people that are dealing with just the energy that somebody individually is going through, independent of anybody around them. Very interesting. It's all, you can see the levels of awareness that are growing in the system of people who can help each other at different levels according to their understanding of themselves. Very interesting. This all has to do with this rising Schumann resonance. That's really good evidence that we're heading towards this field collapse. It's a simple electrical circuit. At the end of the cycle, if the solar system moves through the galactic plane into a positive polarity, you'll see a field collapse, exactly the same as a generator works, where you see a pole moving past a winding that's creating a field, creating a charge, and then in order to get to the next polarity, the field has to collapse. But that's when the most current moves to the system, which is evidenced by the frequency. As the Schumann resonance increases, it's moving more energy through the system. It's forcing it in the body. So this is why we see a flare up in all of the conflicts in society. That's why these structures are breaking down. And we're even seeing it in prophecies. I mean, I just seen Dune 2, excellent movie. I recommend anybody watching this, or I don't know if you are aware of this new movie, Luis, but definitely worth watching. There's so much prophecy around, surviving in the desert, creating your own water in the desert, and creating this messianic figure in the power of belief and what people believe and what they actually can create from their own belief systems. Very powerful movie in a lot of aspects.
What's the name of the movie?
Dune 2, the second part of Dune.
Oh, Dune.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
Frank Herbert's Dune. Frank Herbert, basically told this overarching, historical messianic story, of a Messiah coming out of the desert and leaving people out of the desert, much like Moses or any of the other ones.
Mhm.
Um, that messianic story has a lot of truths buried in it that I think has a lot to do with this simple tendency to learn to create positivity in your environment and naturally attracting versus trying to sell yourself to your environment, creating a feminine tendency, right? And you see more and more people getting forced into that in the community because those structures are breaking down and more of the big business owners are pulling more assets to themselves and laying off people, not understanding that the people are their assets, and investing in people is what the healthiest way forward, instead of just pulling all that energy towards you at the end of a cycle. But that's not the tendency that the system's moving towards. So uh, all the evidence that we see in our external environment is telling us this story, that we're moving from a feminine tendency that we've been locked into over the last 13,000 years and moving into a positive tendency where we're going to start creating more and healthy groups. I've worked in teams my whole life, and the healthiest teams are the ones where people are humble to the needs of each other and just respond to each other instead of trying to control each other. Anytime you're trying to control somebody else, you're pulling energetically. When you humble yourself to somebody else, you're providing energetically. Two totally different mindsets. So, the question becomes, if you want to create structures to create humility, and I'm a firm believer in this. I don't believe that you could actually create a structure without partnering with people who have gotten to a certain energetic state where they can humble themselves to the needs of the people around them. Because those you have to create structures that are controlled from the outside in every way. Unless you have a leadership position that isn't humbled to the needs and responsible to the needs. And if they're not meeting those needs, they need to be pulled. You have to have a control structure that can pull somebody out of that position, or else it grows dysfunctional. I mean, we see that in society. It's so common. Walking that path and learning to provide for your environment and see how it provides for you actually builds your faith and creates higher states of awareness and connecting to a larger view of the overall organism. I can, if you're interested in, in the next slide, I can witness, my own story in my own book. And, no change happens within yourself without letting go of the past, for one thing, because everything has to do with letting go of energies of the way that you used to be, and being empathic and not being a state of judgment to the way your environment is at the same time. Because any point of judgment will force you to see it in a negative light, which is a negative block in your own awareness as to what you can provide for it. Because your environment won't provide for you if you're seeing it in a negative light. You're in a negative tendency, you're pulling from it. So, this overarching theme and pain of hunger is that pain is a product of feeling less than whole, right? It's always painful when it doesn't feel like you can connect with people and you can sit down with somebody and have a real good conversation. And you really can't force individuals to change. You can only create, educate, and provide a path, to our younger generation, because, until we start creating structures where we are all working in equality and providing for each other, then we're not going to create products that do that for the community. And right now, the biggest opportunity is for us to create those structures, where people can plug themselves into co-creative groups and create without, those conflicts of competition, in order to climb social ladders that have to do with siphoning energy towards the top of a pyramid. That's always going to cause you more pain, because it's always going to make you pull you into a sense of lack in order to climb that to the center of that. It's just, but it's also just a part of nature. We fall into these winter cycles to rest, expand our field, and then, come into a greater understanding where we evolve as a species and then start co-creating in a more profound way. And as long as we're connected correctly, our creations don't energetically, come into combat with each other. I don't know if Luis, if how much history you've seen, and there's been a lot of recent history that they've tried to uncover about, that 13,000 year period before this one, where they think, there was this theoretical civilization of Atlantis that lived somewhere around South America area that was actually ended up in conflict with the area in Europe. And that was what brought the end of the last age, where they, basically battled each other, and they kind of eliminated each other. And then, that led to the last age. And if you think about it from a macro perspective, that kind of makes sense. You were at the end of that last positive creation cycle that kind of destroyed itself and pulled itself into another negative cycle. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. What I'm taking with me that I find fascinating is because in the past I've studied, there's a workshop called Positive Power and Influence. And they took from Asia and places like that. The Oriental people would talk about energy, and there's a push, there's a pull, and there's a moving away.
Right.
And the purpose of the class was to teach us that when you're interacting with somebody else, let's say I make a proposal, okay?
Right.
I say, here's an idea of what I think we should do as a team. I'm pushing something. But if I ask you a question, hey, Curtis, why don't you tell me what is your perspective about X, Y, Z? I'm pulling energy from you.
Right.
And then moving away has to do with just disengaging, and it can be positive disengagement, like negative disengagement. So I have that understanding from the past. To some degree, I use it also in my teleology. in my motivation model, in terms of, telling people that we're using this energy to push, pull, and move away. You can find intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, for instance, will have relevance to what you're sharing, to what I have in my meaning. I'm sorry, my motivation construct.
Sure.
But this goes at a deeper level, and something that I found intriguing is that you talk about, when a company's generating a product, okay, does the product takes that energy away or does it give energy?
Right.
And then you use the example of let's say the cell phone, to what degree, is this cell phone relates to my energy? And what I heard you say is it's a way of the company taking energy from you to perhaps bring attention to this object, which might or might not necessarily enrich your life. It all depends how you use the product. If it is for self-improvement, self-development versus wasting myself time in social media, just listening to politics and stuff like that might not be of value. Another thing that is coming to mind is, where are my priorities in terms of, and from an energy perspective, how, what is it that I'm prioritizing? Am I prioritizing giving or am I prioritizing getting?
Receiving, yeah.
Okay.
Right. So,
Uh,
and that's a really good point. So there's obviously good aspects of a phone and there's bad
mhm,
aspects. And they create the bad aspects to make sure that they're receiving. At the same time, they're providing a product to help you connect with other people. So,
mhm,
there's a good aspect, but at the same time, there's a negative aspect. That the trick is to balance it so that you're not negatively impacting somebody. I mean, obviously, creating, you know, sounds that for a fact are going to trigger the dopamine response is not healthy for children. That it's just,
mhm,
all you're doing is trying to make sure that your own pocket's going to get padded, and you're trying to compete against the competition that's doing the same. So that
mhm,
competition and conflict and that sense of not being whole is what brings that about, right? Um,
mhm, mhm,
when you're connecting with people in the right way, and you're humbling yourself to each other, naturally you're going to build a product. And I think that's the real advantage here is we're in this intermediate period where those old structures are breaking down. That you can call it a spiritual awareness, but a spiritual awakening, but all you're seeing is people much more aware of where they're spending their time and energy. And because there's so much energy moving through the system, it's forcing all those issues that we've had as a culture up to the surface that were buried in an old system for so long. So the advantage is, and this is why I haven't actively sold services. Now I do offer basically a restructure, but I'm a firm believer that you could not force talk somebody into realizing how they need to restructure their organization to humble themselves to it and provide for it in order to move forward. Because for one thing, you want to increase creativity because that's always going to lead to more net profit that will naturally provide you more net profit, but you're actually reducing productivity and creativity by creating that imbalance within the structure itself, right? So that's pulling energy towards you. And then you see it actually manifest in the lives of those people. I mean, you probably have colleagues, or maybe you even serve people that were in high executive positions. A lot of times their lives are filled with drama because they're at the center of a system that pulls energy towards them. So it surrounds them with people that want to feed off of all that energy that they've collected. So they're basically creating a black hole, and then it creates an attraction of black holes to surround them, of competition, of people that want to pull things towards them, instead of people that are coming into higher states of awareness, of more wholeness and providing, and then naturally receiving in their environment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, let me revisit that for a second. I'm taking notes. So let's say there's someone who's drama, is a drama person. There's
Right.
creates conflict. Could be a supervisor. We got family members like that. It could be ourselves. So when you say that you attract people, um, is it attracting like-minded people?
Yeah, I
Who
mean,
will be
basically, we're
attracted?
mostly attracting like versus like, right? I mean, that's kind of, I think all of us are doing that. So I really actually appreciate the last presentation I went to that you had, because I mean, you
Hmm.
basically said we have the keys to get out of all of these states of suffering that you see in society. It's just
Yeah.
that the self and the pride and the ego has this tendency to want to pull towards it instead of uh, recognizing yourself as the whole, so that you're always humbling yourself to it and providing for what it needs. Um, Two totally different mindsets, you know. And as the system breaks down, you'll see now it's the system is actually creating a system where your faith grows and a higher sense of awareness, pushing us towards this evolutionary event where as more energy moves through the system, you'll put yourself in conflict at more the more you try to feed off of it. And so it will constantly bring those issues to the surface. I see it in every aspect of society that I look in the way that people advertise themselves on LinkedIn, in the way they interact in their personal conversations. You know, you're growing closer if you're lifting each other up, and you're going farther if you're trying to sell something to each other. It's as simple as that. And it gets harder and harder to sell as the inflation rate grows. You have to keep pouring energy into that system to keep it alive. And more people are gonna, it's getting to, it's gonna get to a forced point of co-creation. The most interesting part is how it lines up with even celestial events. If you think about how what we've seen in the last 5 months from October, from a partial solar eclipse, we're moving to this total solar eclipse in April. You know, what is it doing at an energetic level? How is that, you know, because everything, when you look at the picture and, you know, what I just showed you, as far as all you're seeing is tendencies over time, but it's all one field. And the
Yeah.
only illusion of separation is that tendency to switch back and forth. So
Mhm.
it's so interesting to see how it's uh, coming to a climax in a specific celestial event. What's going to happen after the middle of next month? I mean, we could see a major breakdown of a major corporation. You know, I've already seen it on LinkedIn where you've got major vendor contracts that aren't being fulfilled. One of my one of the people I follow on LinkedIn, she's a shoe salesman, and one of her competitors went dark, stopped filling all their contracts. Obviously, they couldn't fill their contracts. They went dark, completely disappeared. And so a bunch of their sales, the people that they'd sold shoes to, were upset. And then they were had a similar name to her name. And so they went after her, saying, "Hey, our shoe orders didn't get filled because those vendor contracts went dark." And so she was fighting this week, literally this week, over
Mhm.
trying to manage all these people that were trying to fill this somebody else's vendor contract that they decided to say, screw it, I'm taking my assets and going. And I've been asked personally to give my opinion on vendor contracts and how to make sure that you're creating better relationships with your vendors, because vendor
Mhm.
contracts are failing because of the rising inflation, which is forcing, you know, a higher percentage of people in the community are can afford less and less, which is forcing people into self-care. But at the same time, selling the idea of self-care from the coaching community is forcing self-care in and of itself. So you're seeing a larger organism that is learning to heal through self-care and understanding that you need to be more creative. We need to start partnering and start creating things for our environment that encourage co-creation. Uh, it's very, it's very interesting that the time that we're going through is very profound, right? I mean, it really is.
Mhm. It's interesting. A lot to consume here, to consume here and think about, but it's very interesting at the same time. And I'm questioning, as I hear you speaking, in terms of, you know, I'm in the business, I hope that I'm in the business of giving, because it's pretty much helping people sort of discover themselves, learn about
Right.
themselves. Why are we here? What is the meaning of life? What positive thing am I going to bring to the table? And it's like you're saying, it's about love. It's
Right.
about creating peaceful conditions or economic conditions so that people can be content, so we can focus on the right kinds of things, and that leads to a prosperity that is a shared prosperity for everyone. And
Right.
there's no winners and losers. And I know I've been utopic, uh, um, but it's food for thought. What I would suggest when I accepted your invitation, something that I would suggest you do, if you don't mind me giving you some
Yeah,
feedback.
go for it. Any suggestion?
Yeah,
Because I mean, we're all here to provide for each other. I mean, that's really what we're here to
yeah,
do, right? So, I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
me seeing a piece of the puzzle is just one part of the puzzle. You have to,
yeah,
it really does take a group of people to provide for each other to actually create something that
yeah,
meaningful,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. But you have a pearl of wisdom in what you're offering. Uh, and I'm experiencing that pearl. I'm taking something with me. Again, a quarter of it is the energy. And how am I using energy? Am I sucking energy from other people? Am I giving energy to other people? What is my internal state of energy? How is it affecting my moods? So that's something that I would love to think about and sort of even eventually include it in my theory.
Right.
But what I would suggest for you would be, um, if, at the beginning, is telling people this is what this is all about. This is what you can expect in terms of the benefit. Here's the benefit of uh, uh, of this topic, this subject, and this is the positive difference that it can make. It has made in people's lives. And here's perhaps some evidence that you can at some point cover the evidence, and stuff like that. Where some people might get lost is on and again, I said it in the spirit of being helpful.
Yeah.
Um, when I like the fact that you talked about the black holes and you have the galaxies, and one is taking energy and the other one is taking energy. But for me, that I'm much more if I can use Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENFJ. I'm not the logical type.
Right.
I'm much more the conceptual type. So take that with a grain of salt. That for some people might be too much detail,
Yeah.
for the first shot presentation. And for other people, some of the symbols that you using might seem to be too mystical and stuff like that.
Right.
So there's a mystical component, there's a factual component because there's some evidence. Here's some patterns that we need to pay attention to. Here's some cycles that make attention to. You're talking about the aura, and I started asking questions, about definitions and stuff like that. Is perhaps to take people through the process, like not that I do it perfectly, but I try to give people definitions, so that you can build from those definitions.
Right.
And then because I know the definition that you're working out of, then I can continue, to be with you. But otherwise, I have all these questions that are unresolved for me because I can't connect to some of the stuff that you were sharing.
Right.
Um,
It's
so
funny you bring that up
that
because
yeah.
and I thought about this before as I was doing this yesterday. I was like, I should have named this differently. For one thing, the title should have been different. It has more to do with how to be successful in a age that's breaking down, right? Because you want to
Mhm,
attract people and say, look, um, you want to learn how to, for one thing, raise your belief, raise your level
mhm,
of self-awareness. And this is
right.
and this is something that I didn't cover that I should have covered that I forgot to cover. And I think this is the overarching theme that many of the ascended masters, Jesus included, were teaching people. When you serve people
Mhm,
altruistically, it teaches you so much about yourself and how you have to force yourself into supporting your environment. And then because that's how you get energy back. Because if you're not
mhm,
supporting your environment, without asking for money, it won't support you. It will
Mhm.
it will reject you. So it forces you to grow. It forces you to get in more into your creative energy. And as you create that positive tendency in yourself, and to make sure that your mind starts to become more positive, it's like it was like a pamphlet for how to raise your awareness and come into higher contacts with yourself, become more clairvoyant, understand yourself in a more profound way, providing for people in a better way. Um,
Mhm.
you know, where you can create your own water in the desert. I mean, that's why I brought up Dune 2, because you're actually literally creating your own reality when you're starting to become more creative and you're letting go of those energetic attachments that you had in that old system where you just went to work every day and you hated your job and you weren't
Yeah.
lifting the people up around you because everyone is kind of energetically feeding off of one another, right? It's a totally different state of mind. It really does change you from the inside out, and changes your belief system in a lot of ways on what you believe you
Mhm.
can and can't do, because uh, you'll just become more naturally creative. Your rest cycles become a lot more restful. You're not tied energetically to things that you were in the past, so your chemical addictions go away. Chemical addictions are oftentimes, and food addictions are just, energetic attachments, emotional attachments of, thought forms. And so those things naturally bleed away when you just start following that simple path of serving people altruistically. It forces you to grow. You don't have any choice, or else you will not. I mean, eventually you will not support your environment. And it actually creates an evolutionary event within yourself where you start connecting to higher states of consciousness, where you're providing more profound messages to the people around you, because you can read them energetically. You get to a point where you can actually help people detach from energetic attachments and say, look, I can see what's going on there, and this is how to treat it. Um, yeah, really amazing. It really is. It's like a simple
Yeah, I
form.
liked it. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like the also this has been wonderful. Thank you for the gift. Food and drugs as attachments, because I'm thinking we're saying that I'm thinking of a nephew of mine that he has a whole practice. He's not a doctor, but he has this whole practice around uh, drugs, where people just take drugs and then they go through this experience and then they go to a higher place. And he says he talks to God, because he's under the influence of this drugs, and it's actually a channel to be able to get to the spiritual, according to him. And again, you probably heard me say in my presentation, I start listening to people with that anthropological lens, not to be judgmental,
Right.
but meet the person and meet the culture, meet the situation where it's at. Don't judge it, and just study it, understand it in its own terms. So I've done it in the spirit, and do the same thing with him. But I do have difficulty, and perhaps being judgmental, and there might be some biases there that I bring with me. Uh, um, why would I need to have, there might not be an answer, or perhaps I don't know the answer, or which of the answer. Why do I have to, I'll take that later. Um, why is it that I have to go to a drug to
Expand your
reach this
awareness.
higher state?
Right.
When you, and I love what you said, is without these attachments, we can grow to a higher sense of self-awareness without the assistance of this,
Oh yeah. Now I do
I call
believe
it instead. Yeah, go ahead.
I do believe in the power of psychedelics under supervision and done in the right way. Because I have
Mhm,
actually witnessed the power of psychedelics change someone's life like that
mhm.
once,
Yeah, yeah.
when I was in college. It's actually in my book. I think yeah, I mean, if I don't know if I sent you a copy, but if if you don't read the whole book, if you just read that one chapter on psychedelics, I tell a story about somebody that I witnessed in college who was addicted to cocaine, and
Mhm,
they overdosed on LSD, and it changed them bang, like that. Because, and there's a really good documentary that Michael Pollan put together on Netflix called How to Change Your Mind. I think maybe I talked to you about it last
Yeah,
time.
yeah. I read the book. I read the book. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Like,
excellent,
yeah.
excellent documentary. And I know other spiritual teachers that take people on ayahuasca journeys. I mean, obviously ayahuasca
Yep.
is a new thing, but there's a clinic in Puerto Rico, and I can't remember the name of it. And I watched a documentary about him and how he was a heavy, heavy drinker for years and years and years. And he had an ayahuasca experience where he was shown what part of his past that he was energetically tied to was causing that chemical dependence. And it cured him bang like that. So it caused him, and he was a big business owner. And so that flipped his whole life around. That's what caused him to build that clinic and bring in doctors and clinics to help people guide them through ayahuasca experiences to examine, because it's such a deep experience where you examine yourself, your whole biofield and your whole experience of the way you view yourself. And it can create dramatic experiences that lets go of energetic attachments that you had in the past, for sure. Yeah.
That's what he does. He does this Alaska experience. That's his thing he does. And he goes a lot to, I think it's Peru or Bolivia, places like that. And there's some
Right.
guru there that also deals with that. Okay, so your experience is positive, but I read the book because he gave me the book to read. I read it, and it's not that I deny the benefits of it, and there might be, like I said, under the supervision of the right person, the right individual, the right kind of problem, that might be the alternative for him or her to follow.
Right.
So I'm trying to remain open-minded, but in my perhaps my own upbringing, my parents were adamant, against any psychedelic and stuff like that. So I grew up with that set of values, and but I'm also respectful to the fact that there's science behind it,
Oh
and
yeah.
and
Oh,
my
for
generation
sure.
was biased, yeah, my
Yeah.
generation was biased. So okay.
And there is also in the scientific community, there's also a lot of discussion about how, the evolution of there's possible evolutions that have happened in the past where maybe
Mhm,
civilizations went off planet, and maybe they did that through plant medicine, because
mhm,
plant medicine has shown to just basically just move more information through your biofield. Those studies around John Hopkins and psilocybin, and how they've created this 70% success rate around the fear of death and when you're growing older. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
uh, I don't think those, the evidence is there that there's obviously it's connecting with you with more information for sure.
mhm,
Um, what that experience, how that experience comes in your consciousness is another matter. Some people call it a religious experience, right? Or I met with God, or, everything means something different to everybody, but I don't, it definitely alters pathways in the brain. And if the
mhm,
fruit of it comes to a calmer state where it's much easier for you to focus and provide for the people around you, I don't think it
mhm,
can really be denied, right? I mean, in a lot of ways.
sure. Yeah, yeah, that's it. Okay, listen, I have to go.
Thank you for
Uh,
coming,
uh,
Luis. I really appreciate
yeah,
it.
yeah, I really enjoyed it. Let's keep on talking.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Any collaborative effort in the future is cool with me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I would love to, continue to learn from you, this energy thing, and how it shows up. I wrote, a lot of notes here, and what I'm thinking about is, and allow me to talk out loud here in my models. In my theory, I tell people if you want to determine or be able to predict a person's motivation, which is energy and emotion,
Yeah.
and it has two components. It has, the intensity of the energy, and then the type of the energy, which can be, just to keep it simple, intrinsic or extrinsic. Intrinsic is comes from me. So intrinsic is I'm fueling myself to do something that I want to do, and I'm burning those calories, for something that I find exciting, that I want to do, that I have passion. But while I'm burning those calories, because I'm also acquiring something it's energizing me in a positive way. It's like taking from environment positive force and, and expressing that positive force or something constructive. If it's extrinsic, on the other hand, it's like I'm using energy, but it's depleting me.
Yeah.
It's like an introvert or an extroverted person. If you're familiar with the
Yeah,
Jungian
exactly.
model, okay, so it sucks
Yeah.
energy from you, and that's why people feel depleted, or people fall in depression. So for us, on, we can make a relationship. But I'm going to continue thinking about it, and perhaps even have you a special lecturer to speak. You know, and knowing my audience, I can give you some hints and coaching in terms of how to how to take from what we covered today some very specific things that you could cover to help people understand how this energy expresses itself through how we and how we use it in our motivation,
Right.
that sort of a thing. And then
Yeah.
I
You
I
become much more
love,
passionate, especially when you've affected yourself in a really positive way and you can
yeah,
feel what it's having for yourself that encourages you to do that for other people, right? I mean,
mhm,
uh,
mhm,
without a
mhm.
doubt.
Yeah. So let me write something because I'm having this ideas.
Not only that, but you start connecting in ways to create systems for other people to become more co-creative, where you can start building. I mean, right now, a lot of the reason why I really wanted to put this together is to show a lot of the community where there's advantage in the market, where a lot of companies are letting go of employees because we are all assets. We are all assets. And if you can, people play, well, if I don't go to work for a wage, I'm not going to be able to provide for myself. My experience is different than that. I would say if you come together with a team of people and start building something that the community needs more than anything, you will be supported. There is no doubt about it. You won't have to worry about the money. People will start gravitating towards you because it's a need. You're fulfilling a need. And that's how you fulfill needs is to get into those higher states of awareness by by constantly coming into humility and service to your environment. That's how you channel what the community needs. And by connecting with people where that's where their intention is, that's when the magic happens, right? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. We'll talk some more. I love this. You made my, you made my day. You made me have a good day today. Not that it was
Thank you.
bad, but you made it better. Good energy. Good energy. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. And thank you for coming. I'll let you go. I know you're busy.
Yeah, we have to go to the supermarket, get some stuff before the sunset. So okay, my friend. So we'll stay in touch. I'll try to set up an appointment, in a couple of weeks or so that we can continue our conversation because I love this. Thank you so
Sounds
much.
good.
You
Yeah.
made my day. All right.
Thank you. Take care.
Oh, okay, take care. Take care. Bye.
Bye.